Hi there, I'm Christian Manz and I'm a visual effects supervisor and I'm a creative director in film at Framestore.
How did you start your career in visual effects?
I started in the industry 25 years ago as a runner at Framestore, and I'd done a degree in illustration at Kingston University in London. So one of my tutors was a BBC graphic designer, and she was doing a title sequence at one point, and she let a few of us go in with her to see the work being done for the day, and it was being done at Framestore. And it was something that I didn't think existed. I always loved film and television. My dissertation at university was on visual effects and Doctor Who, because I'd grown up loving them, and the title sequences and stuff. So I guess that love and passion of wanting to do film and TV, and finally having the opportunity of a doorway into it, and that's what running was. And then it's been a opportunity to learn off of all the amazing people I've worked with over the years, and slowly build experience to get to do the job I do today.
What has been the evolution of visual effects in the Wizarding World films in terms of technology and aesthetics?
The Harry Potter films were kind of like a big part of what created the visual effects industry in the UK and worldwide, in fact, because before those days, a lot of stuff was big stuff like that would have been done on the west coast of the States. I worked on the hippogriff for Harry Potter 3, part of the team that did that, and that really proved that creature work to that level could be done outside of the US. So that was a big part that the Harry Potter films played. And then by the time those had finished, there were lots and lots of other movies that were going on. So by the time Fantastic Beasts started, we were existing in a world of lots of other stuff that was being done to that level. So it was kind of like a slightly different playing field to be working in. But I think the visual style of the films has always been what I loved about the Harry Potter films, especially as they progressed, was that they lived in a very real world. And that was the aesthetic that Stuart Craig, as the production designer of the Harry Potter films and all the Fantastic Beasts films, brought to it. And David Yates, as a filmmaker, is a very grounded filmmaker. He wants to make these very real films. So it was but that makes it a challenge, because you're trying to make a real Paris or a real Berlin or New York, but at the same time there's witches and wizards and goblins and house elves and all of that stuff. So you've got to try and make all of that feel like it actually could exist. And obviously with the creatures themselves, that it was a kind of a tough brief to make these creatures be one, likable, which we succeeded obviously with the Niffler, became very popular, but not fantasy creatures, not something that you would expect to see in maybe Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. It had to feel like it existed in this real universe, I hope we succeeded in that, but that was one of the biggest challenges of it, I guess.
How do you maintain consistency with the Wizarding World? Is there anyone checking the correctness of spells or creatures against the books?
No, I mean, that's a lot of our sell. I mean, I think when we're working on the films, me as, creatively leading that department, we're always checking in with the books. We had actually somebody in our department, George, who has worked on all the films, who was an incredibly, a massive fan of the franchise, worked on the Harry Potter tour for 3 years. So we'd actually check in with him and go, what do you think that this actually works in the world? But you always felt very responsible to make sure the stuff worked. I mean, even with the actors, sometimes we'd be chatting, making sure that the spells were being pronounced correctly. That obviously things like Avada Kedavra was always green, But yeah, you always wanted to make sure that it definitely worked. But that was really us talking with David Heyman, the producer, obviously had his big thing, especially on the first film, was like suddenly we were dealing with characters living in houses in New York with electric lighting, but wizards don't use electricity. So we made sure that everything looked like it wasn't connected to a wire or that it was magic. And it's like all those sort of things that I think make the world believable. And sometimes, when stuff comes out in trailers, not necessarily in our franchise, but the fans will tell you whether you've got it right or wrong. But I think, as well as I've touched on, Stuart Craig the production designer, he visually created the Wizarding World. And so he was always the person that would be, even with the creature creation, we led it, but we'd always check in, and I'd always want to get his opinion on what he thought it should look like. He was part of that process. Really, there isn't a singular person. We don't have an authority figure on, but it's definitely all of us making sure we're obeying the rules.
What's the difference between creating a visual effect for real world and one that's meant to look magical?
The toughest thing that we do is magic effects, because there's no real reference point, and often the brief can be quite nebulous. You're not quite. But I think, the Obscurus in the Fantastic Beasts films was something like that, where nobody really. The description in the script was very different. It was more creature-like, a literal creature that came out of somebody. But you're always referencing real stuff. I think with the Obscurus, we were referencing kind of Newtonian fluids, liquids that move interestingly. Even with the animals, to be honest, they look like one thing, but they behave like another thing. Do you know what I mean? So so that's what makes them fantastic. Maybe it isn't necessarily that, suddenly the Niffler looks like a sort of a mole stroke platypus, but behaves more like a little annoying dog that's trying to get, or like we base that on a honey badger. So, but trying to ground something in reality and make you believe, because ultimately our job is to make you believe that was filmed, that was on set and it was part of the picture. So I think whatever you're doing, and a lot of the road to discovery of what that thing should look like is showing the director images that are nothing to do with what the thing is, but it's like, do you like this? Do you like this image of? I mean, I remember the Obscurus. We went through there was one image of a person caught in the middle of sort of an explosion that was full of dust and everything, and that became quite because it's like, the negative space that they create. That was it's powerful, but actually you can't see what the actual thing is, and it's like, there's something in that, So it's. I would say you're always referencing reality in my thing, because you've always got to have something that you're aiming for, and that is the toughest thing that we do, magic. So yeah.
How do you keep a coherent look of the shots, since there are different VFX companies working on them?
We work, I'm working with the initial part of working on the film is working with the director to come out on this film. It was working with David to come up with the sequences as storyboards and stories, and then that becomes previs that is done by one company. We have one production designer and we have one director of photography. So we had two production designers on this one actually, but you have a vision from each of those people. So by the time you've got to set and you're filming, you've got a coherent look to the sets and a coherent feel to the lighting. And I think by the time we're handing stuff to our facilities to do the work, you cast the facilities that are doing the work according to their strengths. A big part of working with people for me is whether I get on with them. Are they fun people to work with? Do they do cool work? And ultimately, you're leading them, but they're leading a massive group of people that I don't interact with. And do they get what you're trying to do? That's a key thing. Do they get the aesthetic of because it's very, I guess with our films, and it depends what film you're working on, but our films do have a very particular aesthetic of being, as I said, very grounded and very real. And it's very quick, easy with what you do in visual effects, with animation or effects, to diverge from that. And if somebody doesn't get that, then that's my job then to kind of try and guide them back towards where they should be going, And it's by constantly talking to them, by supplying them all the right data that we give them. We give them, say, multiple scans, all of the references from set, and by briefing them with that cohesive vision that I've got from working with all of those. So it a lot relies on me in that job. That's the visual effects supervisor's job in that respect, is to as somebody was saying earlier on in a talk, to interpret for the director what the director wants, because the director doesn't speak in visual effects. I speak more in visual effects and what's possible as well to be done. So it's. But I think that is the key responsibility, and some stuff, if it your hope is that the director is just commenting on whether it looks good enough or that it's telling the story well enough. Hopefully the bit that you're doing is they're not worrying about, does it look coherent between scenes. I mean, for me, we share buildings and things like that, or backgrounds. I would never share a character, for instance. I know other shows and studios do that, but I feel like that would be, as I say, like having Newt Scamander played by Eddie Redmayne in some scenes and then having him played by Bruce Willis in other scenes. He's just different, and you can't put because he's been acted and created by other people. So you're very careful about how you split the work as well. And with a film like Fantastic Beasts, it's easier because there's so much different stuff. There's a wizarding duel in Berlin that's self-contained, a dinner being turned into a dinner banquet being turned into a big storm, that's one sequence, and a duel in things. So it's easier to contain that work to be one cohesive thing, but you've also got to be, I've got the overall picture. And it's interesting because obviously when those people get to go and see the finished movie and they see how their work slots into the finished thing, it's quite, I didn't know that was, but you hopefully have meant that it is all coherent without them even realizing it is. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah.
What do you think about virtual production? What are the positives and negatives?
Yeah, I mean, virtual production has been around for quite a long while, but not being called virtual production. So we've been using like NCAM to visualize sets on through the camera on a few things. I mean, films like that I didn't do, like Oblivion, that was 13 years ago, had a massive projected back wall to be the background to a sky house that they had in that movie. That was virtual production, really. It just wasn't called that. I think it's here to stay, but it's still finding its way. I mean, it's what we've needed for years in terms of, because visual effects is you're always selling something that will happen eventually in post-production. And that most of the people who are on the physical production and pre-production and film, they stop at the end of filming, and then the next time they see the film is at the premiere. But now we're pulling what we do into physical production, so that the implications of what you do in physical production are more understood, of what a difference it makes later on. And also understanding, like I found on Fantastic Beasts, our tool that we used, which was to virtually scout all of our environments and be able to display them on set, all of them, through an iPad, was a way that me, the cinematographer, and the production designer, as well as, of course, the director, could work together to make sure that all the answers that I needed to produce the finished pictures were already done. They were part of that process. As I think before, it always felt like they stopped and then they'd turn up at the grade or at the finish and go, I didn't think you were going to do that with it. But I felt by the time we moved into post-production this time, I had all of the answers I needed to get the finished pictures done. And I think that's those departments that have been around for a lot longer than visual effects, realizing what they need to give us to actually make a successful picture, but also by it, we're doing more stuff in pre-production and on shoot than we used to do. LED screens, I think they're a tool, and I think they're probably best for lighting maybe than trying to do final pixel shots. But I think they're probably here to stay, not in these massive volumes that people, I don't really see a world where everything's going to be shot in a volume. It would be sad if it was. But I think they're a tool, and they definitely can make stuff. I mean, like Framestore did with Gravity 12 years ago, that what it was used for there was the lighting, and it made the integration of all of the CG with the actress completely believable because the lighting was the same, as opposed to what usually happened before, where you'd have a static light and a blue screen, and lighting was always the thing that you'd be fighting as a compositor. You'd always be trying to do tricks and things to try and make it look like they were in the same space. But that moving and different coloured lighting, etc., makes it feel like you're glued to the background more. But I think the rise in LED screens will quickly go the other way in terms of the amount of stuff being shot in them. But they're definitely a tool that you can use. And I think what's more interesting is probably the tools to visualise what you're doing earlier and better, using game engine stuff to visualise, get to an answer quicker of what it should look like. And also AI stuff as well, the use of machine learning to do various parts of the visual effects pipeline that you want to spend. There's not enough people in visual effects worldwide, so you want to spend more of that time doing artistic stuff and less time doing all the stuff that can be done by a computer, basically. So hopefully that will balance out as well.
There was also a lot of pre-production work on Gravity, where all the camera movements were programmed.
Yes, that was a virtual production show, and I think there've been lots of aspects that I've been using virtual scouting for at least the last 2 movies, so that's probably 5 years or so. It's just actually more now. It's more the fact that it's very rapidly become a tool that's become accepted by production designers, cinematographers, and they're more interested, basically, because I think everybody's seeing it as a thing of like, oh, that means I can actually have I actually have more of an impact on that final picture than I did before. More control.
What is it like to be on set versus work in studio in post-production?
I love it. I love working with a film crew, because it's a film set. It's everybody has their job, everybody has their particular thing, and it's all this massive collaborative thing that comes to that moment when they say action. And that's all those people there to make sure that when they say action, that everything's there in place. And I think when you have a really good collaborative working relationship with everyone, it's amazing. And sometimes, I think particularly actually the last section of the Fantastic Beast shoot this time, there was a whole load of scenes in the Bhutan village at the end, and we shot that very intensely for like 2 weeks. But it was amazing. We were tired. It was the end of the shoot after 6 months of filming. But every day it was like, right, we've got this rough idea. Where are we going to put the camera to do this? How's this stunt guy going to do this? And you had to really think on your feet as to how this would work later on. So it was, after all of the prep and all of that kind of for most of the film, suddenly we were going, well, what if this guy goes into a wall there? That'll be cool. How are we going to do that? Well, let's screw a batten to the wall so the stunt guy can stand on the batten, and we'll drill a hole through it so he can be on a rope through the wall, and let him go, and then he'll fall off and all that sort of stuff. And that was great. I found that it makes you feel alive, when you're, and it feels creative. As I say, my job feels more creative than it's ever been, I think, by being there, because you're really at the coalface, trying to get the thing filmed. But obviously you realise that by the time you've left that filming process, that you're like, well, I've still got more than half of the job has yet to be done. You've got to put everything else in. But you hope you've laid the groundwork for what that thing's going to be. And at all of those, I think the other thing with virtual production actually is that the biggest thing about it that's useful is that things that are learnt very early on get carried on through the whole process. As before, it was very easy for a decision to be made in pre-production that would be forgotten because it will be a discussion, and then you'd spend 6 months later, you'd spend a whole load of time investigating the same thing and come to the same conclusion, and it's like, but didn't you know about this back there? So it's more of that thing of trying to continue the process from beginning to end, which we achieved to a large point on Beasts this time. But I think that's exciting as well, because it really feels then like everybody who was part of it at the beginning is part of it, of what was up there at the end.
What is the most challenging scene you have worked on?
Wow, that's a big one. I think in the Fantastic Beasts films, the most challenging thing I did was probably still the suitcase interior scene in the first movie. And that's because it was a big part of the creation of that universe. It involved a lot of creature design, and David wanted to see a lot of it as a continuous shot and moment, so it was a lot of work over a lot of months to get to the point of being on set to shoot it. But then we had 5 companies working on the finished thing, so some shots had 5 companies working on them, so that was a lot of work to try and, as we were talking about earlier on, making sure that it all coherently fitted together. And there was one long shot that David didn't see together until the last day. I'd shown him all of it in bits, but to see it together and working together was literally right to the end. So that was probably the most challenging thing I've done on those films. I think there's every film has its different challenges. 47 Ronin I did was stereoscopic. Was in camera stereoscopic, and that brought a whole other technical challenge that made the creative challenge even harder. And that was a massive learning experience, So I think there's every job has its own things, but I'd say that you want to be challenged. That's why you do the job. You don't want to walk into if I'm looking for what my next film would be. I want something that's going to challenge me. I don't want something that I already know what that's going to look like or in my head. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it will be boring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
No, thank you very much.